Rachel sat across from her son at the dining table, the ticking of the old wall clock filling the silence between them. The roasted chicken she had carefully prepared was still warm, but Rachel wasn't eating much. Her son Michael was already taller than her, his shoulders starting to broaden, his face no longer that of a little boy but not yet fully grown into a man's. She often wondered when that change had happened, how the years had slipped past without her noticing. Tonight, though, she could feel a shift in him, a maturity in the way he looked at her. It started as a normal evening. They had eaten together just as they had done for years since her husband passed. Michael chatted a little about school, about basketball practice, about a friend who had just gotten his driver's license. Rachel listened and nodded, smiling at the parts that reminded her of her own youth. But then, without warning, the mood at the table changed. Michael put his fork down carefully, almost deliberately, as though the decision to stop eating was tied to the weight of what he was about to say. His voice was calm, steady, but it carried a depth that surprised her. "Mom," he said, looking straight into her eyes, "don't you ever feel lonely?" Rachel froze. Her hand trembled slightly as she set her glass of water down. Of all the things she thought he might say something about school, a new request for sneakers, or even a casual question about dinner, this was the last thing she expected. His words landed deep, stirring feelings she had kept hidden. Her instinct was to smile, to laugh it off lightly. She had done it many times before when people hinted at her being alone. When neighbors suggested she should get back out there, when friends tried to set her up with someone. But hearing it from her son was different. It was not a casual suggestion. It was concern. Genuine concern. Rachel searched for words but only managed a soft reply. "Why would you ask me that, Michael?" He shrugged, but his eyes never left her face. "Because I see you, Mom. I see how quiet the house gets after I go to bed. I see how you look at old photos sometimes. And I don't know. I think Dad would want you to be happy. I think he would want you to have someone who cares about you again." Rachel's breath caught. It had been 5 years since her husband passed, but the memory of his laughter, the strength of his presence, was still part of her daily life. She had told herself again and again that she had enough with her son. That love had come once in her life, and that was all she could ask for. But now, listening to Michael, she felt a small ache in her heart. Not because he was wrong, but because he was right. She looked at him, seeing both the boy who still needed her and the young man who was starting to understand the world in ways she hadn't expected. His face carried traces of his father, his jawline, the curve of his smile, but his eyes, those steady, thoughtful eyes, were all his own. And tonight they held a wisdom that startled her. "I don't want you to be alone forever, Mom," he said quietly. "You take care of me, but who takes care of you?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to tell him she was fine, that she didn't need anything more, that she was strong enough on her own. But deep inside, she knew he had seen something she had hidden, even from herself. There were nights when the silence pressed too heavily against the walls, when she missed hearing another adult voice in the room, when she longed for the comfort of simply being held. She had buried those feelings beneath her responsibilities as a mother. Yet, somehow, her son had noticed anyway. Rachel forced a smile, but this time it wasn't to hide. It was softer, more vulnerable. "You're growing up too fast, Michael," she whispered. He grinned faintly. "Maybe, but I just want you to be happy." Dinner ended with little more said. But Rachel carried his words with her long after the dishes were cleared. She sat alone on the couch that night, the quiet of the living room pressing in. The lamp cast a soft glow on the family photos lining the wall of the wedding picture. The snapshots of their vacations, the baby pictures of Michael. She studied them closely, as if they could give her answers. For the first time in years, she asked herself a question she had avoided. Was this all her life was meant to be, now raising her son, keeping the house, and filling the silence with small routines? Or was there something more waiting for her, something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for? Michael's words replayed in her head, almost like a whisper. "Don't you ever feel lonely?" She did. And admitting that even just to herself felt like opening a door she had kept locked. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart unsettled. She wasn't ready for change, not yet. But deep down she knew something had shifted. Her son had seen her truth, and there was no hiding from it. Anymore, what she didn't know was that his question was just the beginning. An unexpected spark that would lead her toward a path she never imagined. She'd take again. The morning sun rose slowly, painting the sky in pale gold. Rachel stepped outside with her gardening gloves tucked under her arm, the cool air brushing against her face. She had always found comfort in tending the small patch of soil in her backyard. It gave her hands something to do and her heart something steady to hold on to. The garden had been her quiet refuge after her husband's passing. A place where silence felt less heavy as she bent down to pull a stubborn weed from the earth. A sound broke the stillness, the scrape of a rake across dry leaves. She glanced up and saw her neighbor, Daniel, in his yard. He moved steadily, gathering leaves into neat piles. His shoulders were broad, his movements calm, and his presence always carried a quiet strength. Rachel had known Daniel for years, though not well. He had moved into the house next door around the time her husband passed. Like her, he carried a story of loss. His wife had died a few years earlier, leaving him to manage life alone. They had exchanged polite waves, short greetings over the fence, the occasional small talk about weather or neighborhood events. Nothing more, but today. Something was different. "Morning, Rachel," he called, his voice warm but gentle. "Good morning," she replied, brushing soil from her gloves. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The autumn breeze carried the scent of damp leaves, and the silence between them didn't feel awkward. It felt expectant, as though something new lingered in the air. Daniel leaned on his rake and looked toward her garden. "Your roses are still hanging on. Most folks gave up on theirs weeks ago." Rachel smiled faintly. "They're stubborn, like me." He chuckled softly. Stubborn's not a bad thing. It was the longest conversation they had shared in years. And though it was simple, it left Rachel strangely aware of him. The way his voice carried kindness without effort. The way he didn't rush, didn't fill the silence with needless words. She found herself studying him as he turned back to his yard, the steady rhythm of his work, the quiet presence that seemed to fit the morning perfectly. When she returned inside, Rachel caught her reflection in the kitchen window. Her hair, pulled back in a loose bun, showed a few more strands of gray than she liked. The lines on her face told stories of years lived and burdens carried. She wasn't a young woman anymore, and she knew it. Yet for some reason her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. That night, as she washed the dinner dishes, her mind drifted back to Daniel. His simple words about roses, his calm voice, it was nothing extraordinary, and yet it stayed with her. She thought again of Michael's question at the dinner table. "Don't you ever feel lonely?" Maybe this was what he had seen, the way her life had closed itself off, leaving no space for someone new. Rachel sighed, drying her hands. She didn't want to admit it, but she had noticed Daniel before. She had noticed the way he always offered to shovel the snow from his elderly neighbor's driveway, the way he waved to children playing in the street, the way he lived quietly, without asking for attention, but always seemed steady when others needed help. She admired it, though she never let herself think beyond that. The next morning, as she clipped away dry stems in her garden, she saw Daniel again. This time he came closer to the fence, resting his hand on the wooden edge. "Do you mind if I ask what you plant for winter?" he said casually. Rachel looked up, a little surprised. "Mostly tulips and daffodils. They come up when everything else still looks dead. Make spring feel like it's on its way." He nodded thoughtfully. "I might try that. Could use something cheerful in my yard." The conversation lingered. They spoke of soil, whether the best time to plant. Simple things, but for Rachel, it felt like more than just gardening. It felt like sharing a piece of herself she hadn't shared with anyone in a long time. That evening, Rachel sat on the couch sipping tea while Michael worked on homework at the kitchen table. She caught herself smiling, and Michael noticed. "What's funny, Mom?" he asked, glancing up from his notebook. "Nothing," she said quickly. But her cheeks warmed. Michael raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced, but said nothing more. Still, Rachel knew he had noticed. He always noticed more than she thought. As the days passed, Rachel found herself looking forward to mornings in the garden. Not just for the peace of the soil, but for the chance, however small, that Daniel might be there too. Their conversations grew longer, stretching beyond the weather into memories of family, stories of their late spouses, even the little frustrations of daily life. For Rachel, it was strange. She hadn't let herself open up to anyone in years. But with Daniel, the words came easily, as though the silence between them had been waiting for this. One evening, as she folded laundry, Rachel caught herself thinking about him again. She remembered the way his eyes softened when he spoke of his wife, the respect in his tone when he said her name. She thought of the quiet steadiness he carried and how safe it felt. And then, unbidden, Michael's voice echoed in her mind. "You deserve someone to care about you again." Rachel set the laundry basket down, her chest tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. She wasn't sure if it was hope or fear, maybe both. All she knew was that her son had asked a question she could no longer ignore. And now, standing just beyond the fence, Daniel had become part of the answer. But was she ready for it? That she still didn't know. It was late afternoon when Rachel pulled into the driveway, her car loaded with bags of groceries. The autumn wind carried a sharp chill, and she hurried to lift the heavy bags into her arms. Before she could balance them all, she heard a voice call her name. "Need a hand?" She turned and saw Daniel standing by his gate. He had been raking leaves again, his sleeves rolled up, a faint smile on his face. Without waiting for her reply, he walked over and gently took two of the heavier bags from her arms. "Thank you," Rachel said, a little breathless. She wasn't used to someone helping her anymore. "No problem," he said icily. "You shouldn't be carrying all that alone." Inside the kitchen, he set the bags on the counter and stepped back, almost awkwardly, as though unsure if he should stay. Rachel gave him a warm smile, grateful for his kindness. For a moment, they stood there in the simple glow of the kitchen light. And it felt like the room carried more warmth than it had in years. Daniel cleared his throat. "Listen," he said, almost hesitantly. "There's a community dinner at the town hall next weekend. They do it every fall. I was wondering, would you like to go?" "With me, I mean," Rachel froze. The words caught her completely off guard. She hadn't been asked to anything like that in years. Her heart skipped, and for a moment she didn't know what to say. She began, but her voice broke off. She looked at him, searching his face. He wasn't pushing, wasn't demanding, just waiting, hopeful but patient. "You don't have to," Daniel added quickly, his hands sliding into his pockets. "I just thought it might be nice. To get out?" To not be alone, Rachel's breath caught. That last phrase struck her heart. To not be alone. It was the very thing Michael had spoken of. The very thing she had been quietly wrestling with. Finally, she managed a soft smile. "I'll think about it," she said gently. "That's all I ask," he replied, giving her a small nod before stepping toward the door. No pressure. After he left, Rachel leaned against the counter, her heart still racing. The kitchen, once so ordinary, now felt like it had witnessed something extraordinary. That evening, as Michael sat at the table working on homework, he noticed her distracted expression. "You're smiling, Mom," he said, a teasing tone in his voice. "What happened?" Rachel laughed nervously, trying to hide the warmth in her cheeks. "Nothing. Just a long day." But Michael tilted his head, studying her carefully. He didn't press, but she saw the glint in his eyes. He knew. Somehow, he already knew. Later that night, when the house was quiet, Rachel sat in her room with her thoughts. She hadn't dressed up for anyone in years. She hadn't thought about stepping into a hall filled with people, sitting at a table beside someone who wasn't her late husband. The very idea felt both thrilling and frightening. She opened her closet, her fingers brushing across dresses she hadn't worn in ages. She stopped at a simple navy one, the kind that had always made her feel confident without being too bold. She hadn't touched it in years, but the thought of wearing it again stirred something inside her. Still, fear lingered. What if it felt wrong? What if the whole town whispered about her moving on? What if Daniel regretted asking her? Rachel closed the closet and sat on the edge of her bed, She thought of her husband, of the years they had shared, of the love they had built. A part of her still ached for him, and perhaps always would. But another part, the part Michael had touched with his unexpected question, longed for life again. Longed for warmth, for laughter, for companionship. The following morning, she went about her chores, but Daniel's words echoed in her mind. It might be nice to not be alone. She found herself replaying their brief moment in the kitchen, the kindness in his voice, the quiet patience in his eyes. It wasn't just an invitation to a dinner. It was something more. It was a door opening, one she hadn't dared to touch. That evening, Michael spoke again as they cleared the dishes. "You know, Mom, you don't have to tell me, but I think you should go to that dinner." Rachel's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. She turned to look at him, startled. "How do you know about that?" He shrugged, a mischievous grin spreading on his face. "I saw him at the door. You're not very good at hiding things." Rachel laughed, though her cheeks burned. "You're too observant, maybe," Michael said, his tone softening. "But I just want you to be happy. I think Dad would want that too." His words sank deep into her heart. She reached out, brushing his hair back from his forehead, her eyes filled with love. "You're a good boy, Michael." That night she lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. She realized her son was giving her permission, not just with words, but with his acceptance. He was ready for her to step forward. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready too. As the days passed and the weekend drew closer, Rachel's nerves grew stronger. She found herself preparing in small ways, pressing her dress, polishing her shoes, even testing a shade of lipstick she hadn't worn in years. It felt strange, almost like meeting a version of herself she thought she had lost. When Saturday finally arrived, Rachel stood before her mirror, her heart fluttering like it hadn't in years. The navy dress fit perfectly, and though she saw the lines of age on her face, she also saw something else: hope. When Daniel knocked on her door that evening, Michael was the one to answer. Rachel heard his cheerful voice. "She'll be right out." And as she stepped into the hallway, her eyes met Daniel's, and the look on his face told her everything. He wasn't seeing the years of loss or the fears she carried. He was simply seeing her. Rachel's heart raced as she realized this invitation. This simple dinner might be the start of something that would change her life forever. Do you want me to continue with part 4, the evening that changed everything? In the same fast-paced 1,000-word style, closing the story with a strong emotional finish. You've said explain part 4 in 1,000 words. Write this story fast-paced, don't repeat things, use simple words. Write in paragraph. WRITE, only the story. Story must be good. WRITE, the story according to YouTube monetization policies. ChatGPT said. Part 4. The evening that changed everything, the night of the community dinner, arrived with a crisp chill in the air. Rachel stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the navy dress she had chosen with care. Her hair was loosely pinned, soft waves framing her face. And for the first time in years, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness that wasn't tied to work, chores, or worry. She had spent the last week replaying Daniel's invitation, imagining how it might feel to be out of the house, surrounded by laughter and music. And most importantly, with someone who seemed to see her again. When Daniel knocked at her door, Rachel's heart skipped. He stood there, casual yet composed, holding the door open with a quiet smile that sent a flutter through her chest. "You look wonderful," he said simply. There was no exaggeration, no pressure, just honesty. Rachel felt herself blush, a warmth spreading across her cheeks. "Thank you," she replied softly, adjusting her purse. As they walked to the car together, the cool night air brushed against her face. The streets were lined with autumn leaves, glowing under the streetlights, and Rachel felt a strange lightness. For years, she had navigated life alone, weighed down by loss and routine. Tonight, though, every step beside Daniel felt like a tentative opening to something new, something alive. The town hall was buzzing with neighbors, laughter, and the sound of music drifting through the large open space. Rachel's hands tightened on her purse for a moment before she relaxed. Noticing how Daniel guided her through the crowd with calm confidence, It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about feeling seen, valued, and understood. The night of the community dinner arrived with a crisp chill in the air. Rachel stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the navy dress she had chosen with care. Her hair was loosely pinned, soft waves framing her face. And for the first time in years, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness that wasn't tied to work, chores, or worry. She had spent the last week replaying Daniel's invitation, imagining how it might feel to be out of the house, surrounded by laughter and music, and most importantly, with someone who seemed to see her again. When Daniel knocked at her door, Rachel's heart skipped. He stood there, casual yet composed, holding the door open with a quiet smile that sent a flutter through her chest. "You look wonderful," he said simply. There was no exaggeration, no pressure, just honesty. Rachel felt herself blush, a warmth spreading across her cheeks. "Thank you," she replied softly. Adjusting her purse, as they walked to the car together, the cool night air brushed against her face. The streets were lined with autumn leaves, glowing under the streetlights, and Rachel felt a strange lightness. For years she had navigated life alone, weighed down by loss and routine. Tonight, though, every step beside Daniel felt like a tentative opening to something new, something alive. The town hall was buzzing with neighbors' laughter, and the sound of music drifting through the large open space. Rachel's hands tightened on her purse for a moment before she relaxed, noticing how Daniel guided her through the crowd with calm confidence. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about feeling seen, valued, and understood. They found their table, and the evening unfolded with a comfortable rhythm. They talked about small things first: neighborhood news, the autumn fair, and recipes they liked to cook. Rachel laughed more freely than she had in years, surprised at how easily the words came. Daniel had a way of listening that made her feel important, not just polite conversation. His attention was steady, genuine, and, for the first time, Rachel realized she could share parts of herself without fear as the dinner continued. Their conversation shifted toward the past. They spoke of the spouses they had lost, the homes they had built, and the quiet moments of solitude that had shaped them. Rachel felt a pang of sadness, of course, but it wasn't overwhelming. With Daniel, the memories didn't feel heavy, they felt acknowledged and shared. "You know," Daniel said, his voice low and thoughtful, "I used to think I could never smile again after losing her. I thought the quiet would stay forever." He paused, looking at Rachel. "And then, little by little, life reminded me that I could." Rachel nodded, understanding more than words could say. Her own grief had been constant, a quiet companion she had carried for years. But listening to him, she realized that grief didn't have to close the door to joy. It could coexist with hope if one allowed it. The night drew on, the room glowing with laughter, chatter, and soft music. At one point, a slow song began, and Daniel offered his hand. "May I?" he asked with a small, polite smile. Rachel hesitated for a heartbeat, then placed her hand in his. As they moved together across the dance floor, the world seemed to fall away. The lights, the people, the worries, they all faded until there was only this quiet connection. Daniel didn't rush, didn't try to impress. He simply moved with her, letting each step carry them forward. She realized then that this was more than a casual evening. It was the first time in years that someone had truly invited her into their world and allowed her to bring her own light into it. Her heart felt a gentle flutter, a warmth that had been missing, a feeling she hadn't expected to find at her age. When they stepped outside later, the cool night air contrasted with the warmth she felt inside. Daniel stopped at her gate, the street light casting a soft glow around them. His eyes held a sincerity that left her breathless. "Rachel," he said quietly, "I know we've both carried loss for a long time, but maybe we don't have to carry it alone anymore." Her chest tightened. She looked into his eyes, seeing kindness, patience, and something she hadn't admitted to herself until now: hope. The fear of stepping forward, of opening her heart again, still lingered, but it was overshadowed by a feeling she had long forgotten. Before she could answer, she thought of Michael waiting upstairs at home. His smile, the gentle way he had nudged her toward life, replayed in her mind. You deserve someone to care about you again. Those words were no longer just advice. They were a bridge to something real. Rachel took a deep breath. I think you're right, she whispered. Daniel's face lit up with a quiet relief, and he reached out to gently take her hand. Then let's see where this goes together, he said, his voice steady and sincere. For Rachel, that night marked the beginning of a new chapter. She had stepped out of the quiet she had carried for so long, allowed herself to feel warmth and connection, and realized that life could still surprise her. The evening had been simple, unhurried, and filled with moments that mattered, the kind that lingered in the heart long after the night ended, as Rachel closed the door behind Daniel when he finally left. She felt something shift inside her. The house no longer felt so quiet. There was a spark of possibility, a sense that happiness could exist alongside grief, that love could bloom again, even after years of solitude. She paused by the window, looking out at the dark street. Michael's room was quiet, but she imagined his knowing smile. She smiled back softly, realizing that his question, his gentle guidance, had led her here. And maybe that was the most unexpected and beautiful part of all. Rachel climbed into bed that night, heart lighter, mind buzzing with hope. She didn't know what the future held, only that she had taken the first step toward it. And in that first step, she discovered something she had almost forgotten: the thrill of being seen. The warmth of companionship and the quiet promise that life could surprise her again.